Here's a complete emotional family drama story draft. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and said, "I'm sorry, Claire. According to this will, you receive nothing." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Nothing? I sat frozen at the long mahogany table in my grandfather's study while my younger brother Ethan smiled into his coffee cup and my mother reached over to squeeze his hand. No one looked surprised. Not one person. That's when I realized they already knew. And suddenly, Grandpa's funeral wasn't the worst thing that had happened that week. My name is Claire Monroe. I'm 52 years old, a registered nurse, widowed for 6 years, and the oldest grandchild in my family. For most of my life, I was also my grandfather Walter's primary caregiver. If you ask my family, though, they tell you a very different story. My brother Ethan was the golden child. Always had been. Ethan was charming, outgoing, and impossible not to like for about 15 minutes. After that, you started noticing things. He never paid for dinner, never remembered birthdays, never showed up unless cameras were involved. But our mother adored him. "Your brother just has a big personality," she'd say whenever he forgot another family obligation. Apparently, having a big personality excused everything. I was the quiet one, reliable, practical, the daughter who handled things. When Grandpa suffered a stroke 7 years earlier, everyone promised to help. Those promises lasted exactly 3 weeks. After that, it was mostly me. I drove Grandpa to appointments, organized medications, managed insurance paperwork, cooked meals every Sunday, sat with him through endless physical therapy sessions. I missed vacations. I used sick days. I spent thousands of dollars modifying his house so he could stay independent. And I never regretted it because Grandpa had practically raised me. My father left when I was 10. Mom worked double shifts. Grandpa taught me to drive, attended every school play, and helped pay for nursing school. Taking care of him never felt like an obligation. It felt like love. Ethan visited maybe 6 times in 7 years, usually around holidays, usually with a camera. He'd post photos online with captions like, "Cherishing every moment with Grandpa." Then he'd leave before dinner. Grandpa noticed. He never said much, but he noticed. About 8 months before he died, something strange happened. I arrived one Tuesday afternoon and found Ethan leaving Grandpa's house. That alone was unusual. Even stranger, Grandpa looked upset. After Ethan left, Grandpa asked me to close the kitchen door. "Claire," he said quietly, "if anything ever seems wrong after I'm gone, promise me you'll ask questions." I laughed nervously. "Nothing's wrong, Grandpa." He stared at me for several seconds. "Promise me." So I promised. At the time, I thought age and illness were making him anxious. I was wrong. The truth was much worse. Grandpa passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months later. The funeral was beautiful. Ethan delivered an emotional eulogy that had half the church in tears. I nearly walked out. The man speaking sounded nothing like the brother I knew. Still, grief makes people strange, so I kept my opinions to myself. 3 days later, we gathered for the reading of the will. That's when everything shattered. The attorney, Richard Benson, announced that Grandpa's entire estate, his house, investments, savings, and antique collection worth nearly $2.3 million would go to Ethan. Everything. My mother would receive a small monthly allowance. I would receive Grandpa's watch. Nothing else. The room fell silent. Richard looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Monroe updated his will 6 months ago." 6 months. Right around the time Ethan had suddenly started visiting. I looked at Ethan. He smiled sympathetically. "Claire, Grandpa obviously had his reasons." I wanted to scream. Instead, I thanked the attorney, picked up Grandpa's watch, and went home. I cried for hours, not because of the money, because I believed Grandpa would never intentionally erase me. Something felt wrong. Then I remembered my promise. If anything seems wrong, ask questions. So I started asking. First, I requested copies of Grandpa's medical records. As his healthcare proxy, I still had legal access. Buried in the records was a note from Grandpa's neurologist written 5 months before his death. "Mild cognitive impairment observed. Recommend independent legal assessment before major financial decisions." Interesting. Very interesting. I thought I understood the situation, but I was only beginning. I contacted Richard Benson. He seemed nervous. Eventually, he admitted something surprising. Ethan had arranged the appointment for Grandpa to update the will. Ethan had driven him there. Ethan had waited in the office during the meeting. That wasn't illegal, but it certainly wasn't ideal. Did Grandpa seem confused? I asked. Richard hesitated. Mr. Monroe appeared distracted, but he insisted on the changes. I thanked him and hung up. Something still didn't fit. Then everything changed. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Linda Chavez, Grandpa's longtime neighbor. Claire, she said carefully, there's something you should probably know. Linda explained she'd seen Ethan visiting frequently during Grandpa's final months, but the visits weren't pleasant. Several times, she'd overheard arguments. One afternoon, she'd heard Grandpa yell, "You can't threaten me with that." Threaten him? About what? I drove straight to Grandpa's house. Technically, Ethan owned it now, but he'd listed it for sale and hadn't moved in yet. Using the spare key Grandpa had always insisted I keep, I entered for what I assumed would be the last time. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just answers. In Grandpa's bedroom closet, behind old tax files, I found a locked metal box. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Most were from Grandpa. None had been mailed. The first letter made my hand shake. Claire, if you're reading this, something happened exactly as I feared. I sat on the floor and kept reading. Months earlier, Ethan had discovered that Grandpa had secretly loaned money to help me after my husband died. It wasn't much, $40,000 spread over several years. Grandpa considered it private family support. Ethan considered it ammunition. According to the letters, Ethan accused Grandpa of favoring me and threatened to tell the entire family that I'd manipulated an old man for money. Grandpa was devastated. He hated conflict. The letters described increasing pressure, repeated visits, arguments, demands, and then one sentence stopped me cold. Ethan insisted I remove you from the will. He said otherwise he'd challenge my competency publicly and destroy our family. I couldn't breathe, but there was more. Grandpa wrote that he'd taken steps to protect me. He'd informed Richard Benson. He'd created additional documentation, and he'd hidden instructions. Instructions leading to page 7. I had no idea what that meant until I remembered something. During the reading, Richard had looked genuinely shocked. I called him immediately and asked one question. How many pages was Grandpa's final will? Silence. Then Richard said, 6. I drove to his office the next morning carrying Grandpa's letters. Richard read every page. By the end, he looked pale. Then he opened Grandpa's estate file. Inside was a copy of the 6-page will we'd already seen. But attached to the back was a sticky note in Grandpa's handwriting. Missing page 7? Check original vault envelope. Richard stared at it. I've never seen this note. Within an hour, we were at the bank where Grandpa stored important documents. The sealed envelope containing the original will was retrieved. Richard carefully opened it. Inside were 7 pages, not 6. Page 7 had somehow disappeared before the family reading, and page 7 changed everything. It contained a legally executed amendment. Grandpa had anticipated coercion. The amendment stated that if any beneficiary attempted to influence, pressure, manipulate, or conceal estate documents, that person would immediately forfeit all inheritance rights. The forfeited assets would transfer entirely to me. Attached were sworn statements from Grandpa, his physician, and Richard documenting concerns about Ethan's behavior. There was also a handwritten note. Clara's given me love, dignity, and companionship. She expects nothing. Therefore, she deserves everything. Richard looked stunned. So does this mean? Yes, he interrupted. But first we need to determine who removed page 7. That investigation took less than a week. Security footage from Richard's office showed Ethan entering after hours 2 days before the will reading. Richard had occasionally allowed family members access to collect paperwork. Ethan used that trust. He'd removed page 7 from the file. Unfortunately for him, the bank's sealed original proved tampering. The confrontation happened at a family meeting requested by our attorney. Ethan arrived confident, smiling, relaxed. That confidence vanished the moment Richard placed the original 7-page will on the table. What is this? Ethan asked. Richard calmly explained. By the end, Ethan was sweating. My mother burst into tears. Ethan, tell me you didn't do this. He denied everything until Richard mentioned the security footage. Then silence. Complete silence. For the first time in my life, my brother had no charm left. Probate court ruled that Ethan had intentionally interfered with estate administration. He forfeited his inheritance exactly as Grandpa intended. He also faced civil penalties for document tampering. My mother didn't speak to him for nearly a year. Ironically, the family scandal Ethan wanted to avoid became public anyway. Only this time, everyone learned the truth. I inherited Grandpa's estate, but more importantly, I inherited certainty. Grandpa hadn't forgotten me. He'd seen everything. A year later, I turned Grandpa's house into a community respite center for family caregivers. People who spend their lives caring for others often feel invisible. I know that feeling well. At the dedication ceremony, Linda hugged me and whispered, "Walter would be so proud." For the first time since Grandpa died, I believed it. Looking back now, I realize something important. People who quietly carry families are often the easiest to overlook. But being overlooked is not the same as being unvalued. Sometimes, the people who love us most see our sacrifices, even when nobody else does. And eventually, the truth has a way of finding its missing page.